This is part two of a panel discussion between Dr. David Shoemaker and Dr. Richard Kaczynski. On the last panel discussion, we got into some fantastic questions you all sent. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of them, but we do have the opportunity to get into more on this part two. In this discussion, we will be getting into orders and initiation, and what a privilege it is to be able to host both of them to share their lived experiences and incredibly valuable perspective. So let's get right into those amazing questions. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Richard and David. This is part two of a panel discussion led by me, and this time we are talking on the subject of orders and initiation. So welcome. Let's dive right into these questions. Of course, starting with the first question, what would you say are the benefits of going through the AA and or the OTO?
Rock, scissors, paper.
Yeah, go for it, David.
Okay. Well, they each have different, every order is going to have its own strengths and weaknesses and attributes and teaching style and ritual style and everything. So that will always vary, but I'll speak to the ones I can. In orders like AA and Temple of the Silver Star, the virtue, one of the main virtues is structure of training. The fact that training occurs under the supervision only of people who have done the work already and mastered it, that can help you avoid pitfalls, the kind of mistakes that people typically fall into, to have an outside source of evaluation, to get particular tools of training that may not be available to the general public. That is the case. And of course, there is a community aspect in Temple of the Silver Star. AA, on the other hand, is solitary, so different attributes there, as I said. If in the last segment we talked a little bit about people who might not want to join an organization, and of course, I'll throw in the flip side of the point here, which is there may, for some people, there may be no advantages of joining a group. You might want to go totally solitary, but assuming you do, I think that sort of structured training and knowing that the material has been vetted and used by the people teaching it and such is a real value. With OTO, of course, the style of teaching is different. We learn in OTO primarily through the experience of the rituals and study of the system, and internalizing the lessons of initiation and what that means in our inner and outer lives. And of course, lots of local groups do offer other kinds of classes and such. It's not the same kind of order in terms of testing and training like you'd see in AA or TOTS, but it's equally valuable, just a different kind of modality. So those are the things that come to mind for me.
Yeah. I guess I can pick up where you left off. One of the things I think that's cool about joining one of these groups associated with Aleister Crowley is that you have this opportunity to experience Aleister Crowley's system of initiation as he intended it, without any modern day like improvements, interpretations, or innovations. And that was a big part of the appeal for me. I wanted to go through what was this stuff. Crowley's, I enjoy his writing. What were the rituals of initiation that he intended? And another aspect which David kind of talks about is this idea that in something like a group like OTO, which has this more social rather than solitary component to it, is that you do get that social support, whether it just be as simple as you go to a group function, a Gnostic Mass or other group ritual or class or whatever, but you're sitting in a room full of like-minded people who share your interests, and while you may not necessarily go, when you go home, you're still going to do your magical work by yourself, but you're around other people who are on that same path and on that journey, and that's a way of like recharging your batteries, for going back home and kind of keep doing your own work. And I think that's another one of the values of being part of a group. So,
Definitely.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. So, moving on to question number 2, which someone sent in, which is, do you think it is possible to improve on the magic of Crowley? And if so, is there room for that improvement in the AA?
I'll dive in on that one.
Yeah, go for it.
Here's something I think a lot about this. I think conceptually, Crowley would have said, yes, please improve on my work. I think in practice, if anyone came to him and said, I think I've improved on your work, what do you think, Crowley? He might not have been so quick to agree that they'd succeeded. So I think we have to keep that in mind. But I think it is certainly possible to improve on anyone's work in anything over time, centuries, decades. Um, he did a masterful job of setting up structures and making them flexible enough. I'll speak to AA, for example, um, making them flexible enough so that a person can come through and find the landmarks of the system in place just as Crowley left them, but also find their own way through that jungle and innovate and discover themselves in a way that couldn't be programmed. You couldn't pre-program that. So in that sense, we all improve on Crowley's work as we hack our way through the jungle, as Crowley might say. And also, I think there is an important role for AA to be a living tradition, which doesn't mean diverging so much from Crowley's landmarks that they go away, but more like we should be learning from accumulating knowledge of humanity and the sciences and everything we're discovering. Otherwise, it becomes a calcified system that doesn't live. So I think there's plenty of ways to hold the landmarks, but also keep it alive.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I think improve perhaps is a loaded word, and I might prefer the term expand on or build on,
Mm.
because Crowley's system, for instance, is built on this foundation of the Golden Dawn. So as much as Crowley kind of poo-poos the Golden Dawn, I mean the system of correspondences and everything else is built on that edifice, and I see that a lot of the work that Crowley did in building on that edifice kind of points the way to how we can do the same thing. So he took that Golden Dawn, the stuff, he expanded it, he brought in some of his own, UPG from, the holy books and Vision of the Voice and all that kind of stuff. And so I would say that, as David suggests, that it's not only possible to expand on this, but I think it's necessary, or again, it's not a living tradition. It's it's an Edwardian recreation society, and I think one of the places where I really see room for that, and again, this is kind of echoing what David said, is in incorporating our knowledge. The reading lists that Crowley put together were reading lists from 100 years ago, and he was recommending books that were, there are classics in there, of course, but there's also sort of like modern day texts that kind of, we're just kind of keeping current with thinking in philosophy and science and all of that. And so, you can look at the reading list and you'll see, Kabbalah Denudata by Norvan Rosenroth. But, if you're living in the 21st century, why would you be doing that? You could be reading, Moshe Idel, Elliot Wolfson, Arya Kaplan, Daniel Mott, and the Stanford translation of the Zohar. I think the idea was that, just as Crowley was saying, here's kind of the current literature, we can follow in that path. If you want to read Tantra, well, there's, again, David Gordon White, and Andre Perdue, and Gordon Drzevic and Keith Cantu and people like that who are pushing our state of knowledge forward, and it goes on and on. Greek magic, well, Georg Luke, and Christopher Farione, and so on. So I think we definitely want to keep incorporating knowledge as things grow, and not stay calcified in the past. And also I want to apologize for any of those names I've thrown out that I may have mispronounced. Many of them I've only seen in print, so I did my best.
Good reading list for listeners and viewers as
Excellent.
well. They'd be like, I'm taking notes. Let me go check that out.
I think it's just kind of exciting because there's just been, like in the last 30 years or so, just this explosion of research in Western esotericism, whether it be, and also just in specific areas, micro areas like, Kabbalah and Tantra and Greek magic, grimoire studies. I mean, just so much more primary source materials available now than it was in Crowley's time. And
Yeah.
we'd be fools not to take advantage of it.
And you were listing relatively recent things, but realizing that Crowley's original reading lists came from the first decade or two of the 20th century, there's even many decades of things that we now would consider kind of old, but that are important and foundational to our modern understanding of the sciences and psychology and religion and such. Like, consider that Crowley didn't even, I'm not aware of any evidence that he had exposure to Jung's mature writings throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, up till those deaths. So this is an example of a mid 20th century um, incredibly influential thinker that couldn't have made the original reading list. So
Yeah.
just kind of note on that.
One thing that often I'll bring up is this idea that Crowley probably talks about Gnosticism. I mean, those Nag Hammadi texts, which kind of form
Oh,
the essential corpus of what we know as Gnosticism, weren't even discovered until 1945, and that
Wow.
was like 2 years before Crowley died. But at the same time, there is a value in going back to some of these texts. While something like J.G. Fraser and the Golden Dawn or the Golden Bough might be considered kind of outdated and déclassé these days, it's valuable to understand what Fraser was saying because it was very influential to Crowley. So,
mhm.
again, if you want to understand Crowley, reading Mathers or Nirvana Rosenroth or the Golden Bough would be helpful. If you want to actually know, you know, Kabbalah or something like that, studying the more recent, books on that topic will serve you better. So it's kind of also a matter of why you're reading it, to understand and gain insight into Crowley and where he came from, or what the state of the art is.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah, very, very good point too about sort of separating those out. And this next question, question number three, is really similar to the one I just asked you all with a slight difference. And that question is, did Crowley foresee any specific ways that Thelema might evolve after his death, or was it meant to remain static?
Richard, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. Whenever I encounter this kind of a question, I think of a letter that Crowley wrote to William Bernard Crowe. This is again in the 1940s, so just a handful of years before Crowley died. And he basically says to William Bernard Crowe, saying, I was born in the old eon, and I've got all this baggage attached to the old eon that I carry with me. And all, the old eon formulas still work, but somebody who comes after me, someone who was born in the new eon, actually needs to work out the mechanics of magic in the eon of Horus. And he kind of points to Liber Reguli as kind of an example of the direction, but at the same time, he's saying that that's up to somebody else. So I definitely think Crowley expected that Thelema would continue to evolve.
And I think in the same set of comments, noting that someone not born in the new aeon, maybe you just said this in different, slightly different words, but someone not born in the new aeon wouldn't be able to have the fullest understanding of what it even means to be in the new aeon compared to someone who'd been born earlier. But I think it's pretty clear if you look, especially at Crowley's last writings in the 40s and such, when he was pretty focused on promulgation through the OTO and such, that he was hoping after his death, society itself would become more thelemic. And perhaps he saw that as inevitable based on his worldview of what Thelema was and about the aeonic shift and everything. But it certainly seems like he was hoping there would be continued expansion and adoption of Thelema as a worldview, philosophy, religion, however you want to think of it. Um, so certainly in that societal sense, it's harder to get a read on what he might have expected in terms of the specific systems of training, sort of harkening back to the previous question.
One of the things I actually uh, occurred to me as you were speaking is this idea that after Crowley died, that there are people like Gerald York in London and Carl Germer in the United States, and there are other collectors around the world, down in Australia and whatnot, who were actually making an effort to copy everything they had in their archives and share it with each other. The idea being that if there was some sort of a disaster, and in Crowley in some ways kind of expected there would be some sort of, or could be some sort of cataclysm, that there was the ability to kind of reconstruct, the supreme secret and all that stuff from his papers. And so those who survived Crowley kind of made it their mission to kind of try to ensure that this material was safeguarded by being duplicated in multiple locations, even though it was just, photocopies or what have you. So I suppose that that kind of ties in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing in retrospect to think about how there might have been, and in some cases we know there might have just been one single manuscript or typescript copy of something we now consider an essential central uh, polemic text, and certainly in the correspondence that I looked at and published from Carl Germer to various Thelemites, including like York and Jane Wolfe and Phyllis Seckler, and all these people were, hey, do you have that? Because send me a copy and I'll make more copies. And there's a lot of that kind of communication, making sure both sides of the Atlantic were covered, and that missing pieces were filled in, and then a lot under Germer's watch were published, or under his direction eventually.
And I guess we learn how insightful or foresightful that was. I mean, Carl Germer in particular kind of was worried about some sort of cataclysm. I guess having lived through World War II and being in a concentration camp would kind of do that to you. But we see how, Sasha Germer was robbed of a lot of these Crowley manuscripts that were then taken out in the desert and then wound up getting burned and destroyed. And if it weren't for the fact that Gerald York had made typescripts, actually, it wasn't Gerald York who made them. I think it was actually Kenneth Grant who did all the typing, a lot of the typing. Those things would have been lost. But through that sort of foresight, this stuff was preserved, even if not the originals, or at least transcripts available.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. A lot of good information there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks to our forebears for having foresight.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So taking this conversation into a more personal realm, which I think is going to be exciting. Question number 4. What does OTO membership mean for both of you in this stage of your magical career? If you could talk about that.
I can dive in. Being a more senior member of the order, I can say that one of the things that happens is there's transition from kind of a focus on your journey and taking the initiations to being in a role of service and guiding others and just guiding the order itself. And I guess in some ways, I think that me coming to the OTO, as I mentioned earlier, was really about I want to experience Crowley's rituals as intended, and part of my continued involvement is that I want to facilitate other people being able to experience that if they so choose. And so rather than kind of this common feeling of, what am I getting for my dues? It's, which seems to be a fairly common sort of way of approaching, this question of membership or being a dues paying organization. It's kind of like, no, man, this is cool. How can I help? Mm-hmm. And, but at the same time, early on in your initiation in the OTO, that's really kind of about your journey, as an individual through those Man of Earth degrees. And it's when you shift to, like the Lover Triad, where you become eligible to sit on the Electoral College or the Grand Tribunal or Supreme Grand Council or the Areopagus. that you become involved more in the management and running of OTO. And so I think there's that kind of shift happens. And with that comes a bit of like stepping back, the idea of getting out of the way and making room for new people coming up so that they can have that opportunity as well. So I guess, there's just that shift, I think, just from my own journey to that of service and teaching and trying to make OTO better.
Yeah, lovely points. The first thing that popped into my head uh, with this question was the fact that for me, it's impossible to separate my adult life from my life in OTO
Yeah,
because it's been my whole adult life, after early 20s, um, so thinking about it, what it means to me now is sort of like also reflecting on my entire life. Uh, but I have a parallel experience of moving from, hey, let me take these cool initiations and see what Crowley was getting at with these teachings, and then into a phase of local service, running a lodge, 14 lodge for many years, and then moving into that service into national realm with, like, Richard and I were both on the advanced initiation team for many years, and Richard continues to be. And just a joy and an honor to be able to serve the order over those years, and meet so many people and teach and share the fellowship of that. So for me now, looking back, but also forward, on what the OTO journey is for me, I'm still excited about going to Noticon, and I'm gonna initiate officiate a Minerval here later in the summer, and things like that are always fun, and of course the people are the best part.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's part of me that thinks, I am doing my will, and a lot of my doing my will is like the writing and the teaching that I do. And I feel like, on the one hand, I would be doing that whether I was in the OTO or not, because that's just who I am. But at the same time, I kind of feel like OTO gives it's kind of space for that as well. So it's kind of like it's kind of synergetic, it's
Yeah.
because it works out, again, because I get to go to, like you get to go to Noticon and give a presentation or, do initiations and so on. So it all works out mutually.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. And so, from your perspective, moving on to question 5, what is the Lima's biggest strength and biggest challenge? Go for it,
Richard.
Richard.
Well, I think Thalima's biggest strength is it doesn't try to create this one size fits all model of how you should act or how you should be, that there's this focus on the individual finding their path and life, and this idea that doing what is right for them and moving in harmony with the universe may not look the same as it does for somebody else. I think that's simultaneously the strength of Thelema because it's, again, customizable to the individual, but I think it's also a weakness because I think a lot of people are, I don't know, I think there are people who are lazy. They don't like to be told, you need to figure this out for yourself. I think people are used to thinking, I'm going to come to this group and they're going to tell me what I need to know. And we're saying, know thyself. And oftentimes people kind of, particularly if they come from, a sort of high control religion, or they're, recovering from this, but they have some of that baggage that they're bringing with them. They might be prone to say, that sounds hard. I'm going to go to this other group where they're going to tell me what to think, and hopefully, that's, the exception, not the rule, but I think that's a hazard that you can run into, that people want easy to digest answers, something that'll fit into a 2-minute TikTok video, and it's, that's not how this works. You got to do a lot of introspection and soul searching and self-discovery, and that's really the essence of the work.
I just had this image of Crowley doing a TikTok video, and it was humorous. Um, I'm not going to give a different answer. I'm just going to kind of pile on to what Richard said there, because I think that's the territory my head was going toward. But a related way of thinking about this is that most major religious traditions in the modern world, and the ones people are most aware of, um, tend to be the kind of places where you look at a founder and say, look how perfect this founder was. You should be like this founder. And if you're not, then you're doing it wrong. And so that's certainly one of the problems that was sort of following on what Richard said, that if people are coming expecting a pre-digested set of moral codes that they must adhere to, and here's the model of the person who did it best, um, then they'll be disappointed, because it's much more subtle and nuanced than that, and ambiguous, because it's always a path of ambiguity as we're trying to find ourselves. Um, and so, of course, sometimes people are craving a certain authoritarian frame for things that don't leave them that latitude of uncertainty and perhaps fear as we stumble through the darkness, finding ourselves. So the challenge for promulgation and for the spread, if you want to think about the spread of Thelema as a tradition or a religion or social movement, I think is also that individual focus, because without something that's a little more easily digested by the mainstream, to say, oh, this is what a Thelemite is like, or this is what this tradition is like, here's the vibe, it's too diverse.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's really a problem, but I think it is a challenge. In other words, it's not fundamentally a problem of the approach or of the tradition that gets in the way of it functioning the way it's supposed to, but it is perhaps a problem in terms of wider adoption.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of thinking what you said about the figureheads of most major religions kind of being these paragons, these models, and people talk about being Christ-like, and don't emulate Crowley. I mean, that's not the
Right.
point here, and people who do are like, yeah, I'm going to take lots of drugs and have lots of sex, but they're never talking about, I'm going to climb a bunch of mountains, I'm going to write a bunch of books. Well, present company accepted. But yeah, I think the whole idea there is, yeah, define your own path. Don't copy someone else, even though that may be the sincerest form of flattery, but find your path.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good points, really good points. And moving this conversation back to sort of your personal journey and OTO, this question is really similar to one we already addressed, but it has, again, some nuance there. And the question is, how has your expectation or understanding changed regarding your role as a new initiate compared to your role now as a senior initiate in the OTO?
Who wants to go
Yeah,
first?
who wants to go?
My mouth open, so I guess I'll start talking.
All right.
Um, um, I hope I can differentiate this answer enough from the other, but I think certainly that transition that Richard and I both spoke to, in terms of the cool stuff I'm learning, transitioning to service being the central point of it all, uh, is something that I think is bound up into this. That certainly I see my role, if I'm engaged in an OTO setting, I'm really sure I'm selfishly enjoying the people and the fun I'm having doing it, but I'm not there because I need something like from the order. I'm there to give something to the order, and therefore to the people in it. And uh, so that's obviously a major shift from just being a newbie and kind of coming in the door. I will say that one thing that's been constant across the 32 years I've been in the OTO, is the very first OTO event I went to, which was uh, my own maternal initiation, and the mass they did after. Um, Everybody there, you know, you know how you occasionally meet people, just very occasionally in your everyday life, and you think, wow, they really are unique and individualistic, and they know who they are, and they're just glowing with selfhood, you know. Um, I go to this event, and everyone there is like that,
Mm.
Yes.
you know, and that is absolutely still the same. And some of those same people are there, just the 32-year-old, 32 years older version of themselves, uh, still, you know, shining bright. So that's one of my favorite things.
That's
Oh,
beautiful.
yeah. That's so true. I don't know, I guess one of the things that comes from having been around for a while is the ability to take the long view of things.
Mm.
I think when you're a newer member, that some of the things that may happen, you know, in the normal course of things, you know, breakups amongst members in the local body, the I know change of leadership, new policies coming down the pike may seem, you know, seismic, you know, kind of like when you're 14 years old, you know, everything is big because, you know, like you've never had your heart broken before. So the first time it happens, it's like it's the end of the world. And, you know, having been at this, you know, like David for like 30 plus years, you know, you see that all those things are just, they're just little blips on the radar, you know, who's connected to who, you know, there's a breakup. People will forget about that in a year or two. There'll be people coming to take initiation who know nothing about that, you know, and these dramas, these insults or slights or traumas or whatever that happened earlier in your career, you know, they're part of the routine. Things change. You know, masters leave, masters come in, you know, and if there's problems, they tend to sort themselves out, but they sometimes it takes a little bit of time, and so that can be hard if you're a new person to say you kind of got to ride this out. But as someone who's ridden it out many times, you know it will be okay in the end. It's just it may suck for a little bit, but you know in the end, you know it's the system of OTO does work these things out. One of the other things I mentioned this earlier is this idea that kind of that journey from junior to senior member does involve recognizing that other people are on this journey as well. And so part of that is being able to get out of the way and again and make room for people to step into, you know, the shoes that you vacated. I'm like really excited to hear that you're going to be officiating Minervals later on this year. I love doing that, and I have not had that opportunity for a long time, just because it's like, oh, there's new initiators. Let them have that chance. I've had this opportunity before, and I kind of miss, you know, doing that in favor of the more advanced degrees. But I'm glad that you're getting that opportunity. So I'm happy for you for that.
Thank you.
I think
It's
one
been a
other
while for me too.
thing. I'm sorry.
Been a while for me too. In fact,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
my first since moving here.
Oh,
Oh,
great,
yeah,
great.
yeah. Yeah, and again, you know, it's when, as part of that natural evolution of things, you know, new initiators come in and they, you know, they need their chance too. But there's also times when, oh, you know, we're kind of tapped out or someone's not available or, you know, or they just want to see someone that's more experienced, you know, in the center chair, as it were. And so that's great. One other thing I guess I've kind of noticed, and this is kind of some wisdom that's come from being in the order for a long time and being in that position of seeing how the sausage is made. And what I mean when I say that is sort of the deliberations that happen at the level of the Electoral College and the Grand Tribunal and the Supreme Grand Council and the Areopagus, is that, and this is kind of a matter of not only just like Robert's rules of order, but also just kind of a practical legal standpoint, is that when OTO makes membership decisions, that is internal and confidential information. That's not reasons those things happen are not broadcast to the world at large. And one of the problems that happens with that is that anyone else can step in and offer their version of things. And because there's no counter narrative to that, that often tends to rule the day. And as one of my siblings in the OTO once said, and I laugh to think about this every day, it's like no one ever says, oh, I was kicked out for being a total a-hole. Everyone in their stories is always the victim, that OTO is bad. But you're not hearing the whole story, the other side of that story. And I think earlier in our discussion, we kind of talked about how there's a lot of misinformation out there. And, for the love of baby Horace, I mean, if you're curious about any of these organizations, I mean, do your research, vet, but also know that what's happening online, particularly from people who have nothing better to do than to spout off angrily at every opportunity, is not what it looks like on the ground. And you may well find that if you go to your local group, whatever group that may be, that those people there are very different from what your experiences on the internet may lead you to believe.
Sure.
Yep.
And I do know that's very true of my experience with OTO.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience over the years of just seeing how hard people work to do the right thing in these administrative decisions, and wrenching decisions sometimes, and deliberations, long deliberations, and thoughtful people really hashing things through. So that's all behind the scenes, and no one's going to go online and talk about. No one can or should go online and talk about all that behind the scenes stuff because it's private. But you're right, that since that won't be presented to rebut incorrect information publicly, it's easy to have from the outside a misunderstanding of what's going on. So yeah, definitely true.
And you make a really good point. No one makes these decisions lightly. And even when it comes to taking drastic measures, no one's happy about it. That's not what anyone wants to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, really good points. And something that came to mind too for some of this audience who may be newer and just sort of getting their feet on the ground here in the landscape, just because someone has a huge following on the internet doesn't necessarily mean they're active in their in-person community and know what's going on. You can easily pay for views or have sock puppet accounts, to make someone's voice seem popular. So I really encourage people to contact any organization you're interested in and find out for yourself, and think critically too about the information you're getting online. So
absolutely,
in real life, that's where it's at.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much for that fantastic perspective. And looking to the future, moving on to this question number 7, what are your projected hopes for the OTO in the century to come? Go for it, Richard.
That's kind of a tough one.
Sure.
Because part of me just kind of feels like the OTO is going to be what it is and what it, then it's going to follow along that path. But I guess I want to acknowledge that the OTO is kind of like a tree that is like sitting down its roots. And if we think that, Crowley tried to establish OTO, but during his lifetime, but after he died, and particularly after Carl Germer died, there was this interregnum. The OTO wasn't particularly active. In fact, at the time Crowley died, there was only one active body in the under Crowley in the world, which was in Southern California. And it wasn't until the early 1970s that Grady McMurtry and all the other surviving members of Agape Lodge all got together and realized, oh my God, we risk all of this going away forever. And they all got together as, again, the sole survivors of, the Lema and the OTO under Crowley, and restarted the OTO. And so that's only been like in the last 50 years. And to see that OTO has kind of grown, not only, here within the United States, but, its roots have stretched, around the world, has been great to see. And again, it hasn't been without growing pains and as Dave mentioned earlier, that the people involved are trying very hard to do the right thing and make the best decisions. But I also just think like this is still early days, and I just hope that we see continued growth and improvement, particularly as we bring in fresh blood and the perspective of those people who other people who are not born in the old eon.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a 50-year span since the sort of late 60s, very early reactivation with some OTO initiations. If you think about the more mature modern OTO, or even the slightly more mature modern OTO, we're talking late 70s, early 80s, and then really you got to get into the 90s to start to see some of the Grand Lodge structures appear, like in the U.S. and elsewhere. So what I think, the questions framed in the coming century, I think one of the things that'll mean for OTO is actually functioning in a more fleshed out way, the way it was intended for the first time it's been possible. In the first era that it's been possible, and to have multiple Grand Lodges and to have local bodies that function within those Grand Lodges in a more fleshed out way, and more people coming in with outside experience for people skills, organizational management, things like that, seeing how that kind of evolves and grows things. So I'll be around for a little of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, that, sometimes this change or evolution does take some time, that policies are introduced or things are attempted. And it's like, it may take a few years to go, oh, well, that didn't work, let's try something else. Or it'll go, oh, that does work. And we also have to bear in mind that, this is a volunteer organization. So this isn't a business. People aren't doing this full time. Although a lot of us certainly put a lot of our time into it. And so, again, that's another reason why some of this progress takes some time. People are working on these things and trying to build and improve and expand as best they can. And there was another thing you said I was going to respond to, but it's already left my head, so I'll pause there.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, great information. Thank you so much, everyone. So on part one of this video, you all discussed, upcoming books that are out, workshops, talks you're giving. So for people who are interested in following you all on the internet or getting updates, what's the best way to get those updates and find you all?
Well, you can find my Living Thelema podcasts and other resources, other videos, lectures I've done and things like that, via the Living Thelema YouTube channel and livingthelema.com. Then my work in Temple of the Silver Star, Initiatory Order, Thelemic Order based on the Golden Dawn frameworks, is totss.org, tots.org. And my work in AA can be accessed through onestarinsight.org. So those are kind of the easy portals.
Wonderful, thank you. How about you, Richard?
Yeah, I can be found at my website, richard-kaczynski.com, but I'm also active on various social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. So feel free to look me up in one of those places.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to both of you. What a valuable conversation we had today, and I appreciate you all for sharing your time and energy.
Well, thank you for having us. Always a joy.
Always
Absolutely.
a joy. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for our viewers and listeners. So until next time, everyone. See ya.
Thanks. Bye.